Hey everyone, I'm Eric. Welcome back to another episode of the SDR Game Podcast. My guest today is Michael Tuso, CEO and co-founder of Calypso. Tuso, great to have you here.
Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So today we're going to talk about a topic that is going to be a really big topic in 2023. So we're going to talk about expansion sales. And with Tuso today, we're going to talk about why it's important, and we're going to talk about maybe a new role that's going to take some place next year. So, but before we are diving into the episode, Tuso, can you explain to the audience what you do at Calypso?
Yeah, absolutely. So I co-founded Calypso last year in 2021 with my co-founder, Christian Ivanov. He's the co-founder and CTO. Calypso helps you expand your existing customer base. So as well as helping out with renewals and risk management as well. So Crosssell, Upsell, renewal is what we help out with.
Perfect. So before we go in the topic, we're going to talk about words like upsell or cross-sell. So what's for those people who are listening, who are viewing, watching this episode, what's upsell and what's cross-sell?
Yeah, so with upsell, you can basically think like more. So more of your existing product being sold into a company. And with cross-sell, the easiest way to remember that is different. So you're selling something different into a company. So those are the easiest, most simple way to define an upsell or a cross-sell. Some people also define like when you sell the same tool into a different team. Some people define that as technically a cross-sell as well. But that definition could get a little bit different based on your product. But generally speaking, whenever you're selling more of your product, it could be at a higher ticket. It could just be to more people. That's an upsell. And then a cross-sell is usually like selling them something different or new.
Yeah, and actually at Chipapa, it was Crosssell, so it was selling to a different team. So that's why. And what's happening right now? So because when we are chatting on LinkedIn about this topic for today, what's happening right now to thinking about having SDR focusing on customers, and maybe when we were chatting, we were talking about maybe instead of saying SDR, maybe customer development representative, so CDR. So what's happening?
Yeah, I think that the customer development representative can be a really great career path for people who are currently SDRs or even people who haven't been SDRs before. It's a different type of sale because you're selling into your current customer base. You're booking meetings into your current customer base, usually to help someone like an account manager get more meetings. And so when you're doing that, the thing that becomes like king and like paramount is context, like really having context into your current customer base. It could be something like usage data, being familiar with their contract value, have their objectives been met. So it's not good enough just to be familiar with product adoption anymore. Like we need to be knowing like, are they actually doing what they set out to do when they purchase the product. So I'm a big fan of the jobs to be done framework in this context. So like, what did they hire you to do? And then like, are you meeting those objectives? And then that's your impetus to sell more within in a company, really often low-hanging fruit. The other thing to think about there is that it's so much easier to sell into your current customer base. So as you think of like, a contracting macroeconomic climate where maybe net new logos are difficult or longer sales cycle, they don't know you as much, maybe they don't have that trust, maybe they're undergoing difficulties, let's just say. But the thing is like you already have been through procurement, you've already been through IT security, you've already gotten that approval to be on the approved vendors list for a company. Which many times is like half the battle, right? Because when you're selling a new logo, you're not just selling to your champion and their bosses. You're selling to all these other people as well. And so The neat thing about the customer development role is like those things are taken care of, right? You've already signed off. Now, maybe finance can step in, maybe that's still a concern. But some of these other elements are, you're on the approved vendors list. And so it's much easier to sell to people who have, already bought from you. And so I think that's really important to consider. So the CDR role, or the customer development representative, they prospect into their current customer base to set meetings for other people, the same way an SDR would set for AEs. And I just think it's going to be such a critical role. And the last thing I'll just say real quickly is that I think that people are going to have this role earlier, meaning there used to be these benchmarks around, oh, you need a certain like amount of revenue in order for this to make sense. And I think that's going to be like shifting lower. So I think that people are going to be able to figure out how to have a full-time person in this role and make them successful, profitable, etc., earlier than what was previously thought. And I think that is a really good thing for sales. I think that's a really good thing for our customers as well.
There is a number to have a CDR?
There's not necessarily like a number, but like, and I would say it's like definitely variable by organization. So, but I have like at conferences heard like sort of like trainers put out like sort of, oh, you need 40 million ARR or something like that. And I just really think that that's going to be shifting, and people are going to be more successful with this type of CDR role earlier than what was previously thought.
Yeah, and I think this for also, if you have a company selling to the enterprise segment, for example, you don't need to have 40 millions to have this role, because that was not the first time we had the role at Chili Pepper. So I know they were trying to have the role in, I think it was early this year. And then we started again. No, I'm sorry, it was last year. But we started the role again in June. And but this time it was different. The first time we call that ADR, but let's say CDR here. But the first time the ADR was on the account manager team, and the second time we had the ADR under the SDR team, because the feedback we got is the account manager team, they don't have time to train and coach the ADR to go after the customer. And so yes, they have one-on-ones, but they give them information, but they don't they are not helping them to go after the account. So what we try is having them on the team, and it was working better, because now they have the coaching and training from the SDR team, but then we also use what the account manager I used to expand an account.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to set it up. I think also, just like with the SDR role, like, it could take a little while to build out success, and you might not see success immediately. And so sometimes you see like people abandoning ship before you have even realized any of the value. And I think just like when you're figuring out an outbound motion or even an inbound motion, it takes a little bit of time to figure out like what is working. Something as simple, we used to do trainings on with the account managers themselves, like how do you come up with compelling reasons for a current customer to respond to you, right? Because current customers can ghost you just like prospects can. Hopefully they're not ghosting you as much, but like, what is that compelling reason that's really centered around them, right? I think like it's important to do that. And when you're prospecting net new logo, it's essential to do that in the customer development role, because they're current customers. And so, someone that might be ideal for this type of role is like someone who is really good at like filtering through technology and understanding like data, like these like almost like SDR little scientist type. You were like that quite a bit, with being able to like analyze data and move around seamlessly through the tech tools. Hopefully we're able to consolidate some of that as we move forward and make it more contextual, and just like there's still automation that needs to happen. I think to help with this customer expansion piece. But those are some of the good candidates for this customer development type role. And also for people who might find an account manager to be an attractive like career option, where maybe they're like, I'm not sure if I want to be an AE, I'm not sure if I want to be a CSM. The good thing about account management is you get to see both. You get like some of that selling, but you get that context as well of the customer. And so it can ultimately be a really good career pathway as well into account management. I frankly think it's like very fun as well. It's like really awesome to work with current customers and learning how to sell to them. And it's transferable skills that you would gain that where you could easily pivot to other roles. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity that oftentimes has been overlooked. And so I think we're going to see this emerging more and more in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think also if we compare to the SDR, I think the main difference also is maybe the SDR is it's less based on the building relationship, because it's here you book the meeting and then they take over the relationship and then they close it. But then for the CDR, here you are going to build the relationship, because you are going to use the champion you have inside the account. You're going to have different conversation with them, and it's not like just, hey, you book the meeting and that's it. You have this relationship. And then the second thing I found that's different from the SDR, it's you have more cross collaboration inside the company also from the SDR. The SDR, depending on the structure you have with the A team, on the enterprise team we had the SDR and AE pairs, so they had some collaboration, but on the mid-market team, it was a round-robin system, so we didn't have like a lot of collaboration. But here on this role specifically, I think there is the relationship with the account manager, but also the CSM team, because the CSM and the account manager, they have different type of information that the CDR can use. And then also something we were using, we had the customer marketing team also that we were using, and so it was super valuable to use those three teams for this function.
Yeah, I think something I've seen recently done well with that is like SDRs have asked their managers for experimental type roles. Hey, let me try this CDR thing, see if I can, add value in this context. And I've seen that go successfully too, where they're like, I am attracted to that. I want to do this type of role. I also kind of see it. I'm looking at the potential for the next step as this account management type role. Can we do a trial of this for, 6 months or 3 months even? And then something else as you were talking, made me think about this role too, was the whole digitization of everything really, and the PLG movement that we're seeing. In the PLG movement, SDRs who are working in that are, in my view, more similar to the CDR type role, because you're starting to get some of that context from freemium product offerings. And so I think then that type of role where an SDR is trying to set meetings from people who have historically used your product starts to look a little bit more like this customer development role. And so I think the more resources, enablement, attention that we pay to that is really important. I think for as long as I can remember, all of the ops and the enablement and the training and the coaching was super heavy on the top of the funnel. And I think in order to build sustainable businesses moving forward, we're going to start trickling down towards that middle of the funnel. And it's no longer like, I can remember working on Salesforce where it's like, oh, I just want to close a deal and then throw it over the fence. I've literally heard salespeople say that. And I think that's going to be, going away. And I think we're going to start thinking about holistic customer relationships and kind of this always be selling mindset that ultimately is better for customers, but it's also better for us because the easiest person to get money from is the one that you've already gotten money from. And so I think this PLG movement has something to offer for this customer development type role, even if you're calling it an SDR still. So yeah, I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, who are not familiar with PLG, it's product-led growth. That's generally companies that are more sales-led. They have a sales-led function, and now you have more and more companies with a product-led growth motion, where basically it's you can have a demo of the product. You need to have a free trial first and test the product before talking to a salesperson, for example.
Well, usually the PLG will be used to indefinite freemium usage. So, for example, if you take like our former employer, like Chili Piper, that's definitely like a sales led motion for the time I was there. And then Calendly, if you consider the calendaring aspect of their tool that they offer for free. That's indefinite, and so that the idea is like they use the product and they can eventually convert, and it's leading with the product at conversion, and even at the earliest stages, that's how Calendly grew, which is the story for Chili Viper is very different. It was very much sales led there, and then when they're using the product, you get sort of product usage information, and it becomes a little bit more complex, but ideally also easier. I think the thing to wait for when someone is using your product for free is they need to have like realized something big, and whether it's like super prolonged usage, or a lot of times what we see is people like, oh, you downloaded XYZ or you installed our extension or whatever it is, and then the salesperson reaches out too soon, and that's like a classic example of you want to kind of maybe wait a little bit and figure out like what is the moment to reach out where the customer has clearly identified something super valuable to them, and that's your marker to reach out. And so that can be like really hard for a customer development representative or an SDR to figure out as well.
Let's talk about prospecting customers. So how do you approach a customer? How do you prioritize let's start with how do you prioritize customers?
Yeah, so the prioritization piece is hugely important. The way that I like to think about this is pretty simple. And so with customer success managers, they should be, in my view, spending time with people who are paying you the most, and that's your prioritization. With account managers, it's a little bit trickier, and it's who has the greatest potential. So where you have CSMs are aligned towards who's paying you the most, like take care of them, you should have a little bit of an inverted approach with account management and customer development reps by potential. The problem is that people have a really hard time figuring out what that means and how to calculate it, how to forecast it, and how to that's a big problem in today's selling world. And so we need to have a hard conversation on like what that looks like in terms of prioritization and figuring out what that potential, or often referred to as white space, is. And that's a big avenue. So sometimes I think people can fall short here because they only look at product usage, for example, and product usage can be correlative, right? You could be using, I had a chief customer officer about a month ago tell me, we're using their product, but I can tell you we're going to churn, right? And so that becomes correlative. Now, for a lot of businesses, if someone is using your product, that can be a very obvious indicator that they're enjoying it. But what I'm saying is that it doesn't always mean that. And so if something is correlative, it's important to double click on it and figure out maybe more risk factors if you're trying to consider churn. Maybe like have you been in contact with a above the line, like a power person? So how do you visualize that information? Is your sales team keeping everything in their heads? So many times I asked someone the other day, how are you prioritizing your expansion sales? he says, "Oh, easy. I'm not having a problem with that at all. It's really easy. I have this list of 450 accounts, and I comb through them every day." And he's like digging, and it seems like, like this huge monumental undertaking. And then we had a whole conversation around that because he realized that like you can get used to things that are bad for you. And like combing through your account, 450 accounts every day to try to find tiny nuggets is maybe not the best way. Another thing that comes up is tribal knowledge, right? Like tribal knowledge is one way to learn, but the problem with it is it's really inefficient, right? If you learn something on the sales team and then like I find out whenever you tell me, like that's a very inefficient process. And that's how people are handling expansion sales and account management today. It's very and in this customer development role, it's very reactive. They're not spending a lot of time figuring out prioritization. They're not understanding risk factors when it comes to renewal. They're not identifying what are those indicators of expansion. If they're using A, that should be an indicator of what the next product to sell is, at what usage level. And we need to be much more scientific about how we're approaching this, and then we're arming our CDRs with this information. It should not be up to a customer development rep to have to figure all this out on their own. And then if they're not successful, oh, that didn't work. No, this is like a business initiative that goes all the way up to the CRO, all up and down the lines of command there, where everyone should be thinking about this because it's so vital and important to the business. And the last thing I'll just say with that is that NRR metric is what you're trying to improve, which stands for net revenue retention. And so when you look at gross revenue retention, you're just saying like, who are we keeping? But you need to measure who are we keeping against how fast are we expanding and growing our accounts as well. And VCs tend to really double click on that NRR metric. But if you're only looking at ARR and net new logos and SDRs and AEs, you're missing a big chunk of your business. And so you're starting to see like VPs of sales pay attention to this, CROs paying attention to this, people get promoted into director and VP of account management, so that they can solely be focused on this NRR metric that then can help the company be more profitable and sustainable as well.
Just to go back on the triggers you were mentioning that they can use to prioritize. You mentioned product usage. That's one, but what other triggers can a CDR use to prioritize an account?
Yeah, so it's one is product usage. Maybe you have time triggers, like I've seen some people like check in after a certain amount of time. Not everything is a license based. You can have like consumption based pricing models. So maybe product usage is more important to someone who has a consumption-based model, for example, and then you just kind of get them in that next tier. Really low-hanging fruit, if we're talking really, really low-hanging fruit, is overages. I see that happen a lot where they have, how are they tracking against like what they've purchased, against like what they're currently using. That often is like super low hanging fruit. And then if you see them approaching a certain threshold, you can proactively reach out beforehand. So that's a little bit more elaboration on the product usage as well. Also like identifying if they're using X product, what is the next candidate for them to be able to sell? What's the next team that they could sell based on what they have purchased already is another one. And yeah, those are a few others to think about too.
Now, let's say we are talking about the accounts. So let's say we pick one of the best accounts we can go after right now. How do you prioritize your prospects inside this account?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is like visualizing it. So I think like again, like I think a lot of people try to keep this information in your head, but if you're managing, even if I was managing 2 accounts, trying to keep all that information in my head is like very difficult to do. I think your Salesforce is definitely a really great tool, but maybe you're not talking to all the contacts, or maybe contacts are missing, or things like that. So I think it's important to be able to visualize things in account maps as thing number one, I would say. I think contacts should have notes from there. I think understanding relationships, like for example, we'll use Chili Piper since we both work there, but like if you sold into a marketing team, visualizing that on a map and then being able to say like, oh, I can sell into the sales team, like who are those actors, what are those intros look like, who are those important people, being able to take notes from there, like that's hugely essential. And what's happening, this sort of status quo for that today is people are keeping that information in their heads. And I think that's really difficult to be proactive with cross-selling and expansion when this information is stored in your head alone, or you don't have that context that you need, because Salesforce provides some of this information, but it's like list form. It's really can be difficult to understand. You have to like think about it too long, and it's difficult. I think what's needed is like a much more visual approach for people, so you can just glance at it, be like, this is where I am, this is what they're using, this is where we need the intro for the next step. It's super clear. And this is like what needs to happen. So in that Chili Piper example, you sold to marketing, the clear next step would be selling to sales, and then maybe selling to Postsales, and going on down the line until you've sold this product to all the different possible departments that you can.
Actually, at Chili Pepper, that's the problem we had, because when we were trying this ADR role with Amina, we didn't have any information inside Salesforce. So we needed to go to talk to the account manager, the CSM, to get the information, and we are starting to document everything to have everything in one place. And so then we can the account manager, the CSM could use that. So, but yeah, that's a really good point. So, do you recommend to start, because what we were trying, and I'm going to start talking about this, because what we were trying or to talk directly to the champion, but sometimes also to go after other, because we are on the enterprise segment. Sometimes we are if the US team was using the product and the EMEA team was not using the product, we are going to talk about the marketing team in EMEA and talk about, hey, this is how the US team is using the product. What do you think is the best, or do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so many thoughts here. So prospecting is so crucial to post sales. When in teams I've managed in the past, when they are prospecting and setting meetings for the account management teams, and you are tracking those number of expansion opportunities that are real and set, it is like directly correlative to revenue in a very strong way, and almost a stronger way than I saw in managing pre-sales teams. So these meetings that you're booking are super important. Now, with the example that you gave to say you have a champion in the US and you're trying to sell into EMEA, is that the case? Okay, so there's a couple of different scenarios that could happen, right? So one, you reach out to the champion and you say, hey, you're using the marketing team in the US, like, I'd like to, chat with you about expanding that into like EMEA, or at least getting like an intro to your contact there. Now, a couple of things could happen. One, they could say, I don't really talk to the EMEA team. That's one that I've encountered quite a bit. Maybe they do know them and you get that intro and then you're able to have that conversation. But a lot of times you're going to encounter friction just like you would in any sales motion. And that is not the point to give up. That's the point to keep going and trying to figure out, different ways. And maybe you almost have to go outbound to that person, right? And you can, there's no question that a warm intro is the strongest approach that you could take. But if the person is unwilling to do so, then that's when you have to get like creative. And I think that point right there, when your current contact doesn't know the person and is uncomfortable making the intro, is where a lot of people stop. And at that point, it's important to transition almost into a little bit of an outbound mentality to try to convert that white space. So what are the things that you could do if they say like, oh, I don't really know them, I don't feel comfortable with an intro? You can, ask them, is it okay if I reference like we're using that you're using us in the US? Oftentimes they'll say yes. So then you can start to craft this message. Hey, you're using us in the US. I'd love to, craft a conversation and show you how they have been successful. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like, hey, you need to buy right now or anything like that. Like it needs to be like really easy for them to hop on the phone with you. That's a classic way I've seen like being able to book a meeting, like where even if the person isn't introing you, maybe you can still figure out how to make it warmer there. Maybe you try multi-threading. Maybe you don't just go after the director, but you go after the managers. Even like reps, I've seen like, sometimes people are like, oh, you only have to go after decision makers. There's so many deals that I've like closed because like an individual contributor introed me to that person after they were like, oh my God, we need this. Even at Chili Piper, like there's so many tools we bought. So I think like the whole like DM approach, decision making, only targeting the decision maker, yes, it's really important, but what do you do if they're unresponsive? And so the answer is not to give up. The answer is to harness some of this creativity and create plays for this too, like map out what has been successful and document those things for this role. And so those are a couple of thoughts there.
With your strategy, are you thinking about, hey, let's start on upsell, in fact, looking for an upseller opportunity or cross-sell directly, or what's your thoughts on that?
When reaching out to the person in EMEA?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, because now I think maybe this question will be before that. So when you go after not a new account, with your customer, obviously, I think the easiest way it's to think about, hey, can we upsell to this team? Because if we know that they have, if we take the example of Chili Piper, they have 50 SDRs, only 20 SDRs are using the product. So we know that here it's easier to convert. So do you prefer to prioritize upsell first and then cross-sell, or what's your thought on that?
I think it is entirely different based on the company that you're in, because like, for example, what if you have like one product, right? If you have one product and you can sell horizontally to all the different teams in a company, that's very different than if you have many products and you're selling deeper into a specific persona. And so your strategy is going to be completely different in a horizontal versus like a verticalized approach. But the reality is most companies are somewhere in the middle. And so if you're trying to sell to maybe a couple of personas with a couple of different tools, like this is where white space becomes really important, because how do you document when is the right moment to reach out for more and when is the right moment to reach out for different? And each company needs to undergo that process of figuring out like what that is for themselves. Some of it is, like I said earlier, like time-based. A lot of it can be like product usage as well. So I think like identifying like and paying attention and trying to just simply book opportunities. What I'm seeing right now is people that's why I think the CDR role is so important, because it helps you focus on opportunity creation in post sales, which I can see is often very much lacking. And when you do create those opportunities, their chances for success are greater than in pre-sales. And so I think like starting with the CDR role is really great in helping these account managers close more business and mapping out what that white space is based on your current product offering.
That makes sense, yeah, because I imagine the context will be different for each company. So yeah, the strategy could be different. Okay, so now I have some questions more about you and your sales career that I wanted to ask you. So what are the 3 books that have greatly influenced your sales career?
Yeah, so the first one that comes to mind is 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. I say it on every podcast. I hope that people read it. It's a really good book. I think it's essential for business leaders and even like people in individual contributor roles as well. That would probably be the number one choice. The second one, I just am a huge fan of Never Split the Difference. You know how much I love that book. So I think that that book is really critical for negotiation skills and helping you get better at sales, but it helps you with like life skills too. And I think that I think everyone should read those two books. In particular, I think I'd say the third is probably Thinking Fast and Slow. So I think I am a huge fan in general of like how can you look at psychology, and or other disciplines in general, and then take those learnings and apply it to sales. To me, that's like super interesting. I do like reading sales books as well, but I think those looking outside for an interdisciplinary approach has often been really helpful. I also read a lot of fiction, and the thing with fiction that I think can be overlooked in the business world is how much it helps with our writing. Being a good, writer is essential for the digital world. And often that skill set gets overlooked in hiring and, career development and things like that. The thing that fiction has helped me with is being able to help me with my own writing and clarity of thought. And so I always recommend, if you want to be a good storyteller, yes, reading books like Building a Story Brand is important because it, highlights storytelling in this non-fiction way. But I think there's tremendous value in actually reading fiction books to see how people actually do it too.
In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your sales career?
Oh, meditation for sure. I think it's just clarity of thought, improved relationships, being able to identify trend. There's just so many things that it has helped me with. So meditation for sure.
When did you start?
When did I start meditating?
Yeah.
2017, I believe.
What was the reason for you to start? It was
a sales rep came into our office and had our entire company on our lunch break meditate for something simple like 3 minutes. And I was like, okay, I felt like I was actually meditating, where I was trying to follow my breath, and it was really impactful. And it was only 3 minutes. I was like, I can do this. And then I did it every day for 2 weeks because we had a free trial to Headspace. And then I went from 3 to 10, and I really liked doing 10. And I just felt calmer and more clarity. Clarity of thought was the big thing. And I felt like it really helped me be a better manager, but I also felt it helped me be more mindful in sales because it really tremendously helped with awareness as well. And so yeah, it was a sales rep that came into our office. Everything goes back to sales.
What advice will you give to a smart and driven new CDR or someone who wants to start in tech sales, and what advice should they ignore?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the first thing is I think the thing that was invaluable to me was finding mentors. And I think that is not a passive exercise. I've seen some people just oh, I can't really find a mentor or whatever. I think it can be a proactive exercise as well. Who are people with maybe a little bit more experience or have done something that you want to do, or or just learn from. One of my earliest sales mentors is still one of my biggest mentors and advocates today. And it's when I feel really stuck, I still go to her, and all it took for that relationship to be developed was she looked at me one day and I was really nervous about closing. And she's like, you're going to be really good at this. And that's all I needed to hear, right? When I was early 20s, trying to figure out how to close deals. And it was totally unlike anything I had done before in college or school. And that's all I needed to hear. And then from there, we have this burgeoning relationship that has lasted over a decade. So that's thing number one. Thing to ignore. Okay. So I think a lot of times I've noticed especially on LinkedIn, prospecting advice or sales advice often comes across in the form of preferences. And this is a really recent observation I've had, but a lot of advice that you see is often people who have maybe not sold in 20 years or 5 years even themselves, And I think that can be like a little bit tough to, and it doesn't mean that you can't ever take advice from people, but I think it means like maybe be careful, because maybe someone, if you become too scared to prospect, or make a mistake, part of working for an organization, by the way, I think is like, do you have the ability to make a mistake? Do you have that psychological safety within an organization? Like, mistakes are a part of like learning. And so I think sometimes when we see things on LinkedIn, it's like someone's like personal preference when it comes to sales, and maybe that their personal preference, everyone has different preferences, so it becomes like really hard to come up with causal explanations of how to get better at sales if we're always looking at things from the lens of preferences rather than what's driving like revenue. So that's a recent observation I've had.
And what are bad recommendations are you hearing right now in sales or the SDR world?
I see a lot of like complaints on LinkedIn in general about SDR prospecting in general. And I do think that SDRs and CDRs can go much further in creating a better sales experience for people. Like, without a doubt, we can all get better at that. But some of the complaints I see are kind of like, okay, like that, I don't see this as like a widespread issue, right? And it just, a lot of times it seems like one-off or things like that. So I think it's okay to make mistakes, period. And I think sometimes we get in this reluctant mindset of like not reaching out to someone, or not calling, or having call reluctance, or spending too much time researching, because we are paying too much attention to naysayers who aren't selling themselves. And I wouldn't even pay attention to messages like that, because mistakes are a part of learning, and we need to give ourselves that space to make mistakes and learn, and that's part of the process. And then as long as we're learning from those mistakes, our managers are giving us coaching and feedback, and we're growing, I think then you're doing everything you can. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Well, so it was a really fun conversation, and thank you for taking the time today to be on the podcast. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the people who are listening or watching this?
Well, I do have a book coming out, but maybe I'll come back and announce that on a separate podcast.
Let's do that. Let's do a second episode when your book will be out. So thank you for everything. It was nice to see you, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.